Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Inner Loops YouTube channel. I'm Kira, and today, as part of our Authors Corner series, I'll be having a conversation with Jenn Koiter about her new collection of poetry, So Much of Everything. For more Jenn and more Authors Corner, you can check out our website to find articles, interviews, podcast episodes, and most importantly, a link to purchase the book. Welcome, Jenn.
Thank you, Kira. I'm so glad to be here.
Yes, we're so excited to have you. I'd love to start with the collection with The Messy Girl, who is this titular protagonist of poems throughout multiple sections of the collection. What makes the perspective of a messy girl, and how do you see the placement of these poems organizing the collection?
Thank you. That's a great question. So the messy girl is kind of an alter ego. Uh, she's a poetic persona of mine. So that Venn diagram is like not a circle, but we overlap.
Yeah.
She's the messy girl is all about extremes.
Mm.
Like you can't have mess without abundance, right? And so she's sort of qualities that I have taken to the nth degree. I like to say that she's great fun for the first half of the party,
Yeah.
so we all know her. And as far as the way that she's sprinkled through the book, that was a deliberate choice. Yes. Because unlike the other two sequences that I kept very much together, the messy girl, as a messy girl is all over the place, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
She thinks about sex and travel and mental health and all of these sort of topics that don't, it's not necessarily as unified, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
I feel like but I liked having something that was woven throughout the collection. So it was kind of a natural fit.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like returning to an old friend, like you're getting through kind of a new unfamiliar section, and then the messy girl is here again. Is that a character that you've written kind of throughout your artistic career? Is that someone that you like got in a real period of like writing a ton of messy girl poems at once?
For that, I did most of them in at once. It was
Interesting.
sort of a one, but when I say at once, for me, I mean this like book was 10 years in the making, so at once was over the course of a few years.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah, wow. So that's fascinating. How did it come together over the span of 10 years? Like, where did you start? How did you know it was done? How did you choose which of your poems would make its way into like this book specifically?
Well, for about 5 of those years, I was pretty much creatively blocked.
Mm.
So, so it was more like a few years and then a 5-year desert, and then a little bit more writing time. Um, so that was interesting too. Just thinking like how do you go back to who you were several years ago
Mm.
and reconcile that um, with who you are now? That's um, that was challenging,
Yeah,
right? And picking out
absolutely.
the things that not necessarily like aren't necessarily who you are, but are still good pieces. Um, and moving, like weaving those things together, because it's not chronological. The book is not chronological.
Hmm.
But I think I don't know if this is true in your writing, but I come back to the same themes over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Like I think I'm writing about one thing and I'm writing about identity again, and that was true for my scholarship as well when I was in academia.
Hmm.
So everything is about identity um, for me, apparently, unless it's about like those are my options.
Yeah.
Um, so it wasn't as challenging as it might seem.
To like put these poems from such different parts of your life into conversation with one another.
Yeah, yeah, like it's like the handle's been replaced a few times and the blade's been replaced a few times, but it's still the same knife, you know?
Oh, I love that. Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Okay. So now I'm interested, if it's non-chronological, I'm interested in when you came into all of these different topics. But I am fascinated by Candy Jones, who I'd never heard of, who is,
Love
for
her
the
so
viewers, if you
much.
haven't, yeah, if you haven't read the book yet, a historical figure with a, in my opinion, far too brief, considering how fascinating, introduction before the collection launches into a section of found poetry from her writing. And I will admit, I got to that section. I was like, oh, like I'm curious about this fascinating little blurb. Put the book down, read articles about Candy Jones for like half an hour, and then came back. What brought you to Candy? How did you get started there?
So, so I like a lot of us, I haunt used bookstores,
Amazing.
and I actually pulled this out to show you. Um, in the dollar book pile, back home in Colorado Springs, I came across "Look Your Best" by Candy Jones, and
Wow.
I saw the cover and was like, I need to own this because I have a huge weakness for like women's beauty and advice literature.
Yes.
Um,
Fascinating and horrifying genre.
and especially when it's mid-century, you know, because I've got the mid-century vibe going. Um, and I love the looks, but oh my gosh, like advice for women in 1960 is just like you said, horrifying and fascinating. And but I read it. So I read the book. I actually read it, and like you know, yes, of course, all very much of its time, but the voice was like catty and funny and just like the best friend you wish you'd had in high school kind of, you know. She's snarky a lot of the time. Like I
Mhm.
just love her. So I did what you did. I was like, well, who was this person? Like why is who is this beauty expert I've never heard of? And so I did the same thing you did, and I went on a like a Google binge, and learned that she was uh, a cover girl in the 1940s. She was on there was one month in 1940 where she was on the cover of like 11 magazines. Like she was a big
Mhm.
deal. And then she did USO shows. She did all this like modeling in New York, and then she married the director of her agency, had 3 kids with him. They divorced. He absconded with their money. She had 3 children to raise. She founded the Candy Jones Career School for Girls. Um, Sandra Dee came up through there, Frances Wynn, like, so it was like this cultural force. Um, and none of that comes up, though. That's not the first thing that you see when you
Nope.
Google Candy Jones. No, it's that she was as part of the MK Ultra program, brainwashed by the CIA, um, and sent ostensibly on spy missions to Asia.
Like
Um,
allegedly, the sources that say that are not the most reliable. So I'm
they are
like,
not reliable
is
at
this
all.
so there's this controversy, right? Of like, did this actually
Yes,
happen to her, or was it a fabrication by her husband who like worked in radio production? So she's got
right.
this like double life, both publicly and privately, of like having this alternate identity that the CIA is using to do spy missions.
And I honestly, and this is not a cop out because I studied like my first graduate degree is in mythology, right? And so for me, it was just like reading another myth. You
Yeah.
know, it almost doesn't matter whether it's true or not. It's interesting, and there it also raises questions about like who controls her story. Um, is she the one who's in charge of telling her story? Does she get to shape her public persona? And it weirdly resonates with the beauty stuff because so much of that is about presenting yourself and how you present yourself and how you tell your story, like as a woman in
Hmm.
public and in private, and in, you know, like what do you wear when you're going out with women versus what do you wear when you're going on a date versus, you know, like it's I saw, maybe they're not there, but I saw a bunch of connections between the beauty stuff and the spy stuff.
Oh, that's absolutely there. Yeah.
And so so yeah, so I just went to town. I bought all of the books that I could by her. She published about a dozen, and
Wow. Okay.
read them all. I scanned them all in to my computer, and then picked out the lines that I liked and made poems with them. And they are probably the most formal poems in the book.
Yeah. So had you had experience with found poetry before that, or did Candy just like begin this huge moment of artistic inspiration for you?
I love found poems.
Okay.
I think they're great fun. I hadn't written a ton, but I'd read a lot.
Hmm.
Um, and the one that weirdly, the one that the form that I chose was most similar to Annie Dillard's book of found poems, Mornings Like This.
Hmm.
I didn't do a lot. I did some erasure poems. They didn't make it into the book. I didn't think they were quite as strong.
Okay.
Um, but they looked really cool. They looked like redacted CIA documents, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll come back to those someday.
Oh, yes. Fascinating. Okay. So, yeah, and it's interesting that you're telling her story through her own words, but also by changing them and rearranging them and transforming them like through your own lens, which is so much
Right.
of what happened to her when she was alive.
Yeah. Well, and trying to find what's underneath, you know, like
Yeah.
there, but it's not there. I honestly don't think I misuse her words.
No, and actually reading it, I'm fascinated. I'm like, what original context did this line come from? Like I believe you that they're found, and then reading them through, I'm like, that is so fascinating.
Okay, some of the weirdest ones came from when she modeled for Salvador Dali, just so you know.
Got it. Okay, okay, that actually connects a lot of that. So yeah, I was gonna ask how you see your work kind of fitting into this collective narrative history of her life. Like she is presumably a muse to you as well as she was to like several
Mhm.
people, including the United States government and her radio television husband.
That's that's an interesting question. I'm like when I think about it, like I'm probably the foremost authority on her work because I have read everything she's written. I can't
Yeah,
imagine there are that many people still alive who have.
yeah.
Um, she's no longer living. She, of course. Yeah, where do I fit? That's a great question. I feel like in a weird way, like I want to give that agency back to her.
Yeah.
The idea of her. Um, that it's a great story and I don't want it to die.
It is.
You know, like
Reading those
down to,
articles, yeah, I'm shocked that there is not already like a movie or a TV show or a
right?
podcast at the very least. Like it's really shocking to me that her story is so vibrant and interesting and there like isn't a ton of writing on it. So I'm very happy that your book exists. To
Now you're
fill that
making me
gap.
think I should do some screenwriting.
I feel like you should as the foremost authority. I'm also, yeah, I'm really interested. So at the beginning of that section, we say all of these are found poems except for True False, which is the one from the Candy Jones section that you, and not, I mean, wrote yourself isn't the right word, but like are writing using your own words. And that poem is fascinating. Like it just really shines. And I think there is like a texture to it that's so interesting, like because it's right up against the found poems, which have their own kind of unique texture. So I'd love to hear more about True False specifically, like how it fit into that section, how you decided to do one that wasn't found poetry.
Like it's not a found poem, but it is a jumble of things that either she asserted at different times or that were asserted about her at different times. Right down to how tall she is. Like her height is listed as like 3 or 4 different things at different points in her books, you know. And so even though it's not a found poem, it still has in my mind the spirit of a found poem
Yeah.
because um, it is that sort of like juxtaposition of all those different, and then of course, you know, me finally throwing myself into this overtly, you know. But yeah, I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah, fascinating. You're finding it in a different way, like finding it from your own
Yeah,
inspiration upon reading all of her texts. It's one of my favorites. So if you out there buy the book, True False, that's my your recommendation. It's one of my favorite ones.
thank you.
Um, yeah, and I wanted to talk
Let's see
more
what
about.
let's see what Candy Jones looks like. Here,
I
wait.
would love to, yeah.
I'm
And I
I'm rehanging stuff up, and I just happen to have. I swear to God, I just happen to have. I stacked these pictures by her.
thought,
Oh no, there she
wow.
is. on one of her covers.
Wow.
Love her.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Fine featured, as tall as I am. She was like 5'10" in 1940.
Yeah, I saw some sources were like she was 6'4", and I'm like, okay.
Right.
So it's all over the place. I mean, I'm sure the CIA were like, we don't want people to know who she is. She had all those like fake passports and everything. But anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on her. It's about you, but fascinating. Everyone should definitely read about her and then read this book. And I wanted to talk also, while we're just on the topic of found poetry, about some of the other found poems that you include. Like we have poetry from TV shows like The Swan, which I'd never heard of, Googled. Another fascinating and horrifying concept. I think like the way that you're juxtaposing like the way that we think about beauty with the way that women perceive themselves, with the way that you perceive women, with the way that that comes through in the poetry is just like so like textured and fascinating. But yeah, how did you find that? How did you choose to write found poetry from The Swan? How do you feel that found poetry maybe differs between these like historical contexts and more modern contexts, like the source material you're pulling from? That's like 5 questions.
No, those are all great. And if I miss one, throw it back at me. I actually, yeah, I watch bad TV sometimes. What that boils down to. And you're right, The Swan is terrifying because it's a makeover show with a pageant at the end of it. And so it's basically like they make these women beautiful and then tell most of them they're not beautiful enough still. Just, you know, to like sum it up in a sentence, right? And I thought that really sums up a lot of what it is to be a woman in America right now.
Yeah.
So I wanted to play with it. And I also, and maybe I shouldn't admit this, really enjoyed watching the thing. It was super dramatic and completely trashy, and writing stuff was a nice excuse to watch it.
Yeah, because they get like fairly intense plastic surgery over the course of their, that's fascinating. It's a grotesque but so fascinating. No, I agree with you. I would watch that entirely. Oh yeah. And I think it speaks so well to the other themes that you're coming up with in your work. So I thought it was like reading those found poems, then into the Candy found poems, I feel like you can really track some of your thought processes or these themes that you're interested in.
Yay, it worked.
It worked, yeah. So transitioning from found poetry, I'm interested in how you approach the process of writing that kind of poetry with writing perhaps like a more traditional poem. What kind of freedoms or limitations you find either working with source material, not working with source material, how it affects the way you approach form, rhyme, everything.
So with found poems specifically.
Or like the contrast you feel, because you write both and the collection has both, like
Oh,
both
yeah,
found poems
okay.
and traditional poems. So like what that process looks like for you, or how those types of poems maybe feel different to read and to write.
Yeah. I feel like poets work well with constraints. And I think folks who are drawn to found poetry are like, we're just gluttons for punishment. We like constraints. You know what I mean? Like it's sometimes it needs to be hard to say what you want to say.
Yeah.
And I feel that way about form. And I feel that way about found poetry as well. In terms of the free verse, which most of the collection is, let's be honest. It's not a formal collection. I hope it feels like there's a hidden form.
Yeah.
That's how it feels to write. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
It does. Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting to think about finding the lines as being a similar constraint as to writing within form, and how that like pushes you in a similar way. Yeah. I'd also love to talk about your travel. You write a lot about traveling in various phases of your life, and how you reflecting on your travel shifts as time passes. And what about maybe travel that you found most inspiring for your poetry?
I've actually written a short essay, with, if folks want to find, it's published by Drunk Monkeys.
Oh, perfect.
Called
If you send it to me, we'll link it in the description
Oh,
below so we
brilliant!
can read the
Yay!
essay.
Called
You're
Why
watching
I
this
Do Not
interview, go
Book
read the essay.
Travel.
Yeah.
And because it's true, everyone, like, when they find out that you've traveled, I was like, oh, you must love travel. I really don't. I really don't. But it does so many good things for me. It's like working out.
Oh my God. Yeah, yeah. In the expansion of the mind through great effort and having to live out of a suitcase and being uncomfortable.
Because I mean, travel is when you, especially if you're going, if you're traveling abroad and you're traveling in cultures that are unfamiliar, it's mildly to moderately traumatic. And I think that particular brand of mild to moderate trauma is super productive in terms of um, figuring stuff out, having like mindset shifts, having um, growth. You know, that sounds so cheesy to say, but it's almost like you have to be off balance in order to change.
Yeah, absolutely.
And especially as an adult. I mean, not so much when you're a kid. Kids change all the time. They're very elastic, but once you get past a certain age, you kind of have to be disoriented, um, to have realizations. And I feel like those realizations are the foundation for writing, for my
Yeah.
writing anyway. So, um, so in that sort of weird, messed up way, that's how travel inspires my work.
Yeah. No, I love that. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so the last part of the collection, the Survivor, by contrast, is really striking and distinct from the rest. It's sparse, it's titleless, it's kind of haunted by the amount of white space that it has. There's a complete shift in energy reading it. How did you navigate situating these poems in a collection? And yeah, how do you think about that really dramatic shift in energy and the way that that section is functioning?
Yeah, that's an excellent question because it gave me a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Those are probably, with a couple key exceptions, those were the most recent poems
Okay.
in the collection. And I also felt, possibly because they're the most recent ones, and you always feel this way about the most recent ones, that they're also the strongest ones in the collection.
Hmm.
So naturally, at first, in my first draft, I wanted to put them front and center. I wanted them right at the beginning, because I really wanted to grab the reader with them. And of course, it's a terrible idea, and every single one of my beta readers was like, yeah, no, those don't go there. My friend poet Steve Schroeder, also, he actually said, wherever you put these in the manuscript, they will leave a smoldering crater.
Mm.
And so I thought, well, then they just have to go at the end. And I don't think there's any, like, it's not like there's nothing else in the manuscript that's about grief. Like, I feel like it's a pretty sad book, really. Although Alexandra Sherman, who contributed the cover art, said that they're sad but with a bite, which I love and would like
I
to
love
see.
that too.
Yeah. So I feel like there are little breadcrumbs that lead to them. Other elegies. The second poem is an elegy to two friends who passed away. most of the characters in like the messy girl is grieving losses a lot as we move through the book. So yeah, so I don't think it's, I agree, it is a big shift. But I hope that there's there's a little bit of groundwork laid for that in the preceding work.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't mean to imply that there wasn't. I agree with, I think, your early readers that it really leaves you in such like an interesting place. And I think I felt warmed up for it, if that makes sense. I feel like the rest of the book I was like stretching. Right. And then I get to the end and I'm like, okay, this is what I've been like warming up and preparing myself for.
I love that. That's fantastic.
Yeah. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that as well, about how you see grief kind of being centered in the collection, about how these poems maybe work through those feelings, how that's been inspiring for your work.
Yeah, and I'm not alone in this. I think a lot of poets write about grief, in large part because we have to. If we live long enough, we accumulate losses, and maybe they're not always as dramatic as the loss that that inspired the survivor, right? It was which is about my boyfriend's suicide. But they're there, right? I feel like that's a time when a lot of people turn to poetry as well, is in grief. And so I think that's important to acknowledge. But it's interesting to it was interesting to me to write throughout the process of grieving, because the poems that like the early poems are very fragmented, because that's pretty much all you can do. I didn't notice until I pulled this collection together how many list poems I have in that section. And I think a lot of that is because that's how you're experiencing things, especially in early stages of grief, is that you experience that loss over and over and over and over again in different contexts. And you also can't string together like long, complex thoughts, right? So you're just jotting stuff down in your phone if you're me. You're just jotting stuff down your phone.
No, I think that's a universal. For sure. Wow. Yeah, it's fascinating to think about how even just the structure of the poems reflects the way that you were feeling at that time. And I'm sure that was a difficult process for you, going through them to prepare them for publication and having to like trace that period so like distinctly and chronologically.
It was actually really nice. I finished up, like I was one of those things that I had sort of left a lot of loose threads. There were a lot of things that still needed to be done with them. And it actually was really healing to edit and and tighten them up and finally say the last things. So it was a great gift. It sounds weird to say, but it really was.
No, yeah, that doesn't sound weird at all. Thank you for sharing that now and for sharing them in the collection. It's a really touching experience to read.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh my God, unfortunately, we're coming to time. I don't want to ask my last question. But very lastly, for our Authors Corner project, we promote authors who have been published with small to medium size, maybe independent presses. Could you talk us through quickly just your path to publication, or what your process has been like, what you think?
Oh, sure. Specifically for the book?
Yes. Yeah. So like for people who want to publish, who want to be in your position, how did it happen? What do you think about it? What would you recommend?
It was the absolute weirdest, most idiosyncratic way to get published.
Okay.
I Day 8 only publishes authors within the District of Columbia. And the way that I came to this was through, they actually do like a version of a slam, right? They have an open mic where poets compete, and then the poets that win on the individual nights go on to the finals and compete for a prize in a monetary prize in a book contract. And so I get published by reading out loud, which is, again, not the norm, but if there are any poets in the district who haven't published yet, would be interested. It's a great opportunity because it's a lovely press to work with. Yeah.
I feel like you're like an actress. Like you were just performing at an open mic one night and they recruited you. Or what is that called? It's like they like found you.
Scouted.
They scouted you. Yes, they heard you reading, they scouted you. Fascinating. Great. So they saw you reading. They were like, we love that. Can we publish you?
Oh no, it was there. They're the ones who structured it. Yes. So
okay.
So I made it. I made it to the finals, and then I won, and I won the DC Poet Project, and then had the opportunity. It wasn't a requirement, but I had the opportunity to publish with them as a result. So yeah, it was bonkers. I had a month to pull my manuscript together.
Wow.
And because I didn't think that I had a manuscript. I didn't realize I had so many poems. Yeah. And then I also, since many of them hadn't been published, I researched super fast responding lit mags. And on Twitter, I actually have a list if anyone wants to follow it, called Fast Lit Mags. So if anyone's interested in quick responding journals, that's a good place to start. And I published 24 poems in between May and the end of August, from like submission to acceptance to publication.
Oh my gosh.
Because I hadn't been submitting. I hadn't been submitting for years.
Wow. And you were like, I want to get these out before they come out in the book.
Exactly.
Oh my, 24 between May and August?
Yeah.
All right, y'all be taking notes. Go to Jenn's Twitter.
It's a good list. It's a good list of journals.
Wow. Yeah, I read for a lit mag and we are not on that list. I'm slow. 25. Okay, I will process that on my own time. Oh my goodness. Wow. Okay, so speaking of your Twitter, where can people find you if they would like to find you on the internet after watching this?
I would love for people to find me. Yes, I love connecting with other writers and creatives. My Twitter and Instagram handles are both Jenn Koiter, JENNKOITER. That's probably the best way to connect.
Okay, perfect.
Oh, and I also have a website. It's jennkoiter.com.
Okay, beautiful. And that'll be linked in the description of this video. And if you'd like to see more of us, The Inner Loop, you can subscribe to us here on YouTube at The Inner Loop. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at The Inner Loop, and on Facebook at The Inner Loop.
The Inner Loop lit?
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh. You are correct. It is The Inner Loop lit on everything except Facebook. So it's Inner Loop lit on Twitter and Instagram, and then just The Inner Loop on Facebook, and just The Inner Loop here on YouTube, which you know because you're here. Please subscribe. Thank you, Jen. She's like more on the brand than I am. Oh my goodness. Okay, well, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for being here. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been a delight to talk with you.
Yes. So thank you. And if you are watching this, go buy this book.